Fulton Sheen, God and Intelligence. Continuation of Chapter 4. 3. The nature of God is not the object of the non-intellectual experience, but God as related to us. The discarded traditional approach to the existence of God began with the external world and allowed its conclusions to be determined by reasoning process, independently of self. The modern approach, on the contrary, maintains that the old method fails to take account of our own selves. The aim of experience is not so much to attain God as He is in Himself, but as He is related to us. The determinant of the validity of the experience is not the object, but the experiencing subject. The experience alone constitutes its own object, and it expresses it necessarily in terms of experience itself. God is therefore to be designated in ways that are extrinsic to Himself, but intrinsic to us. The object of faith comes not from the outside, but the inside. The object of desire does likewise, and their value is determined by the experience which produced them. It is quite true, therefore, to say that at the present time philosophy is carried on more explicitly in terms of value than at any previous time. The great concern of our contemporaries is the absolute validity of the practical idea, and by a practical idea is meant one which has to do with life as it launches itself on the great venture of living. The end of the science which treats of God is the enterprise of considering the place and the value of religion as an experience and attitude of universal humanity. In every case, God as related to man is the object of the experience. Whether or not the proofs, intellectual or affective, prove God's existence matters but little. The values which these proofs symbolize still remain unchanged. There is no need to appeal to an object outside of the experiencing subject to test the validity of the experience. Religion, as a matter of experience, is held to be witness to its own validity. The experience itself is the final court of appeal, and its authority is supposed to be higher and more unerring than that of any logic. The emotional attitude is non-intellectual and carries its own assurance in its own state, and its warrant in the complete satisfaction which the emotion supplies. The spontaneity of the existence and the fullness of individuality which the emotion supplies are the sole and sufficient guarantee of their certainty and of the sincerity of experience. The same criterion is to be used in judging God as a hypothesis. If there are certain forms of religious faith, certain hypotheses, which deepen the meaning of a natural fact, which amplify and extend the suggestiveness of the natural sciences, and so far from traversing their findings, accept and invite them, and if in the world of human conduct they dignify human character, add reach and sanity to man's aims, construct and consolidate human society, elevate and secure the life of a man, and make for peace and mutual helpfulness amongst the nations. If, in a word, a form of religious faith or a hypothesis works in these ways, then indeed is the proof of its validity strong, stronger than the proof of any other hypothesis, because wider and deeper. This verification of hypothesis is not of conceptual order, being, as it is, a spiritual attitude of welcome, which we assume towards what we make to be a truth. This is not the first time in history that philosophy has maintained that God is to be designated by purely extrinsic denominations. Kant designated God by purely extrinsic denominations founded on the postulate of the moral law. In this case, however, the conclusions were confined to purely philosophical speculation. With the modern thinkers of God is designated by extrinsic denominations founded on what is practical and pragmatic. What then is the nature of extrinsic denominations? If God is to be interpreted in terms of experience rather than in terms of knowledge, how interpret experience? It is one of the important problems in the modern philosophy of religion. In its broadest lines, religious experience will be interpreted according to philosophical systems. Pragmatism and idealism, empiricism and Platonism will interpret experience according to their own systems and will consequently lead to divergent results. Ernest Troelstich of Heidelberg, speaking of the empirical and the Platonic interpretations, writes, "The one view inclines to monism and pantheism, and the other to untiring activity and living interaction between God and the soul." Another writer declares that the idealistic interpretations ends in an ultimate being in which all problems are solved and all contradictions resolved, and it reduces the finite world, which is the nearest concern of struggling, toiling humanity, to an unintelligible puppet show. Pragmatism, on the contrary, finds a finite God in its interpretation of experience. The conceptions of pragmatism show the modern age emphasis upon violation, control, reconstruction, scientific method, and the democratic faith that the individual counts, even in the largest concerns, can be taken up as significant factors of religious consciousness. There is yet another broader interpretation of religious experience in which all systems agree. Modern systems yield a threefold general interpretation of religious experience. 1. According to the needs of the individual. 2. According to the spirit of the age. And 3. According to the evolution of the world. 1. According to the needs of the individual. In the last analysis, experience is not of systems, but of the individuals. The idealist has experience, not as one idealist in common with others, but rather as an individual. The empiricist likewise has not the same experience as the empirical friend across the sea, but rather his own individual experience. Ultimately, one of the principal determinants of religious experience is that of the individual needs. The God of the intellectualists was the God proved by reason to be existent. Such a God is too far from our needs, it is contended. Hence, the God I feel I can use is of much greater value. The gods we stand by are the gods we need and can use. Hence it follows that although we cannot prove the existence of God, it does not mean that God has lost all his value. The idea may be theoretically worthless. It is quite true, but it still has a regulative use. Individual need is to be the judge of God, the voice of human experience within us, judging and condemning all gods that stand athwart the pathway along which it feels to be advancing, is the measure by which individuals prefer certain gods at one time and certain gods at another. Professor Lieba writes that the truth of the matter can be put this way: God is not known, he is used, sometimes as a meat purveyor, sometimes as a moral support, sometimes as a friend, sometimes as an object of love. If he proves himself useful, the religious consciousness asks for no more than this: does God really exist? How does he exist? What is he? Are so many irrelevant questions. Not God, but life. More life, a larger, richer, more satisfying life, is in the last analysis the end of religion. The love of life at any and every level of development is the religious impulse. 2. The interpretation according to the spirit of the age. Times change, and God should change with them, not merely the expression of our belief in the deity, but even our very notion of the deity itself, just as we have discarded the old phaeton of our grandfathers. Why should we not discard the grandfather notion of God? We believe in conveyances just as our grandfathers did, but not the same kind. We believe in God too, but not the same kind of God, because Abraham or Paul saw God clearly through windows of ancient architecture. We insist upon looking through the windows whether or not we see the vision. We insist on keeping our windows open towards Jerusalem when they ought to be open upon the life of today. A professor of theology in the University of Chicago has enumerated 18 reasons why we should have a new idea of God. Among these 18, our thought has changed in all subjects in the last 50 years. The scientific spirit approaches reality today through observation and experience, whereas the old notion of God was formulated in a non-scientific way. The old notion of God was that of a creator, and today the world knows we cannot prove the absolute origin of the universe. Furthermore, present-day use of the scriptures is gradually unfolding the man idea. Authority has shifted from the external to the internal. The radical distinction between the natural and the supernatural order is denied. History has proved a new idea of God, fusion of Semitic and Aryan thought, new studies on Jesus Christ, physicology of religion, dynamic doctrine of reality, experience, ethicized theology, literary interest, and the idea of God, new social emphasis, i.e., the attempt to make the gospel real in settlement work, influence of the war, revision of arguments for the existence of God, and finally the new notion of the Trinity. All of these make it imperative to conclude that the traditional idea is inadequate. Men are no longer content to have a God at second hand. The same conclusion has been reached by another writer who antedates this work by a few years, but does not advance nearly the same number of reasons. So important is this chronological measure of God by which he is made to fit the urgent needs of the world's present outreach of endeavors, that its value must be reckoned independently of any evidence. If a man at the present time finds it impossible to accept the traditional notion of God, a philosopher will be found to whittle it down. If a new theory appears on the philosophical horizon, the notion of God or his attributes is made to fit this theory so as to suit better the thought of the age. We must keep up to the minute with our God as we do with our scientific and philosophical theories and mode of thought. Similarly, there is an increasing insistence on a new idea of God to suit democracy as a form of government. The war gave us the Sibboleth, make the world safe for democracy. The philosopher echoed God, make God safe for democracy. Recent political and social developments, which make men increasingly impatient of matters, prepare them also to reject God, who rules simply by divine right. There are many also who feel that the great democratic uprising of the world cannot be without its effect upon our thought of God, and who are finding it increasingly difficult to reconcile the oligarchic and monarchical elements of that predominate in our common God idea with modern democratic urge and impulse. The modern man is all-powerful. Man's life, man's world, are man's achievement. He is mastering the oceans, the deserts, the land and the air. There is no place for tyrants in such a universe where man is so powerful, and the time coming with the advent of the new era of democracy when there will be none either political, economic, or religious. Away then with the bickering monopolist, who will have no other God but me. The author of the history of the world tells us that the higher man of today, in the face of the rising tide of democracy, will not tolerate that old-fashioned theism with its exalted monarch. Professor A.C. McFerret, in an address to the students of the Andover Theological Seminary, enumerated the conditions of which God will be accepted. In these days of growing democracy, the war has gone much to scrape both monarchies and monarchical gods. Such notions of God as King of kings and ruler of rulers were shaped under the influence of courts and thrones, and for that reason are unacceptable in this day and age. The modern man will measure a God for himself, one to suit his own government, and that God, we are assured, will not and must not be an irresponsible autocrat to whom men are but puppets and for whose glory they exist. Keeping in mind that modern tendency to democratize and modernize God, we are better prepared for the shock of Professor Sellers gives us in his next step in religion. Paul's God was an Oriental God. To the modern, he is a cad. For the Americans, if we are to believe a writer in the Journal of Religion, God will be measured to fit the idealized common will of the United States, or else, according to another, will be made the presiding genius or president of the great cosmic commonwealth. 3. Interpretation in terms of evolution. The same spirit which prompts people to measure God by modern democracy prompts them also to measure him by more recent science. Among the scientific hypotheses which have gained favor in the last century, that of evolution ranks foremost. Doubtless the greatest dissolvement in contemporary thought of old questions, the greatest precipient of old methods, new intentions, new problems, is the one effected by scientific revolution that found its climax in the origin of species. There is hardly a philosophy of religion which has not reinterpreted the nature of God in accordance with evolution. This will be made clear in the following chapter, where the modern notion of God is treated. Slowly but surely, the idea of evolution is undermining the foundation of Orthodox Christian theology, for a static conception of the universe was the cement on which these foundations were laid, and as the idea of evolution makes headway and the static conception falls into disrepute, the foundations of the Orthodox theology, which has long shown signs of instability, will become more and more unsuitable, and at last, in the fullness of time, the whole structure will totter and fall. When I say that the idea of evolution is undermining the foundations of Orthodox theology, I mean first and foremost that it is tending to revolutionize our conception of God. The change with a static to a dynamic view of things, from the category of esse to the category of fieri, is bound to have its effect. For the creator of being and source and goal of becoming are, as concepts, at opposite poles of human thought. Chapter 5. The Modern Idea of God. It is not without some misgivings that we begin here a sketch of the modern idea of God. The protest, the descriptions, the dissatisfaction with the traditional notion of God are often made up of hard sayings. We quote them, however, to throw light on the new notions. But we do so without a regret, which has been very expressed by Professor Ralph Barton Perry of Harvard University. No one, he says, has taken the name of the Lord his God in vain so frequently and so unconcernedly as the philosopher. While philosophers dispute, believers witness with dismay the apparent dissolution not only of God, but of immorality, freedom, marriage, and democracy as well. I wish that philosophy, for technical purposes, might speak of a language of its own, and settle the dispute of the vernacular that does not arrest the attention of the community. If this were possible, philosophy would be better entitled to the full benefit of that immunity from direct social responsibility which is most conducive to clear seeing and right thinking. There is much unanimity among modern philosophers concerning the necessity of a new idea of God. The old notion of God must give way to a new one to suit the needs of the 20th century. The worst God of all, it has been said, is the God of the older Christian theology, God the Father, the creator of evil, who, in his all-powerful and all-knowledgeable, deliberately plans a cruel universe, bristling with traps for his creatures. The older theology thought of God as spending every moment of his eternity in eavesdropping and spying on immoral man, haunting every room and listening to every obscene story, and equally observant of the murderer and the child with his fingers in the jam. Recent political and social development, which make men increasingly impatient of masters, prepare them also to reject God, who rules simply by divine right. A God of this kind, omnipotent and monarchical, leaves us cold. Who has not had sometime the feeling that it was a little unfair for the omnipotent and omniscient God to judge human beings created by him, apart from their own choice, in a state of comparative ignorance and weakness? If I thought there was an omnipotent God who looked down on battles and deaths and all the waste and horror of this war, able to prevent these things, doing them to amuse himself, I would spit in his empty face. The old notion of creation, too, as applied to God, must be done away with and be included in the same circle of ideas as the waving of a magician's wand. It has no place in the serious thinking nor in the genuine religion, it being the product of a childish fancy, and lacks sweep and infinity enough to meet the requirements of even the illiterate mind. The vaster vistas with scientific evaluationism has opened, and the rising tide of social democratic ideas have changed the type of our imagination, and the older monarchical theism is obsolete or obsolescent. The place of the divine in the world must be organic and intimate, an external creator, and his institutions may still be variably confessed at church in the formulas that linger by their inertia. But the life is out of them. We avoid dwelling in them. The sincere heart of us is elsewhere. Whatever sort of being God may be, we know that he is never more that mere external inventor of contrivances intended to manifest his glory, in which our great-grandfathers took such satisfaction. Though just how we know this we cannot possibly make clear by words either to others or to ourselves. But this is so much rhetoric. It would be unjust to limit the grievances of modern philosophers to such statements. There seems to be two complaints against the traditional notion, which cannot well be passed over. The first of these is that God is static. The second, that he is aloof from the world's needs and desires. 1. God is static. By a static God is meant a rigid, immutable God, existing in solitary bliss and perfection. That helplessness, which a fixed and static perfection implies, that eternally immobile and substance with which theology in the past has identified its perfect God, must give way to the notion that the non-static, which involves the rejection of the idea of God as perfect in the sense that he is unchangeable. It makes obvious that what is perfect cannot change except for the worse. But even were that true, it does not justify us in saying that the impossibility of change or its absence is either a feature or a condition of perfection. Changelessness may be a ruinous condition. It is evidently a conception that is totally inapplicable to life in every form and at every stage. Life is constant self-creation. We are in some ways and in some degree new beings every day, for the past constantly enters in us and becomes a part of us. The instant that process stops, death ensues. Death is the stopping of the process, but it is also the substitution of another. Decay sets in. As a matter of fact, neither in the world or in dead objects nor in the world of living beings can we find anything but process. But if this be so, God can in no sense be static and changeless. Such a notion of him seems to contradict the very fact of daily experience. 2. God is aloof from the world's needs. If God is static and the world is progressive, it follows that God is little interested in the world of ours. It is highly important, therefore, for religious thinking and for philosophic thinking also, to rid itself of the tendencies which seeks to magnify God's greatness by separating him from the world, placing him at a distance from it, and making him self-sufficient and complete without it. Instead of a divine being who dwells aloof from the world's process and can only look on at it, seeing that it is already statically perfect, God must be a God in the dirt. The prince of darkness may be a gentleman, but we are told he is, but whatever the God of heaven and earth is, he surely can be no gentleman. His menial services are needed in the dust of our human trials, even more than his dignity is needed in the empyrean. He who is a king, not a marionette, cannot beg off from the duties of his station. Benevolent he must be, but benevolent despotism becomes God no more than man. The old attributes which are shaped under the monarchies are useless today. They are nothing but the shuffling and matching of pedantic dictionary adjectives, aloof from morals, aloof from human needs, something that might be worked out from the mere word God by one of those logical machines of wood and brass which recent ingenuity has contrived, as well as by a man of flesh and blood. Instead of bread, we have a stone; instead of a fish, a serpent. But if the traditional notion of God is insufficient for modern minds, because its God is static, and consequently gives man no genuine cooperation in the cosmic struggle, what kind of God will meet modern requirements? The answer is simple. God is evolution. So far, the general negative criticism of the traditional doctrine of God. We now pass to some specific and constructive views of individual philosophers. They are chosen as representatives of different outstanding schools. God, according to Professor S. Alexander. It has been thought that for some time that the era of new systems of philosophy had closed, and that the future held merely the task of adapting them to science and classifying them. Professor Alexander of Manchester has risen to protest that novelty is not yet ended in philosophy. In 1914, in a paper read before British Academy, he said, "I have the conviction, which I cannot here defend, that there is only one matrix from which all qualities come." The Gifford Lectures of 1916 and 18 were the realization of his conviction. These lectures, published in 2 large volumes entitled Space, Time, and Deity, though new in their content, yet have something in common with contemporary philosophy, viz., the insistence on progress and evolution. Professor Alexander tells us that the stuff from which all things are made is space-time. Space-time is motion in itself without the motion of a body. Space and time are not distinct. They cannot exist separately. Time is the soul of space-time. Space is the body of space-time. Spinoza had extension and thought as the attributes of his one ultimate reality. Professor Alexander's theory retains extension as space, but changes thought into time. This is not to imply that his theory is in any way a copy of Spinoza's. The resemblance extends no further. From space-time all things come. In the course of evolution, it breaks itself up into various extensions, all of which are retained in the all-embracing stuff of space-time. Therefore, any portion of space-time possesses qualities common to the other existence generated without the universe of space-time. The fundamental pervasive features of these extents are categories except quality. Quality is distinct. It varies with the kingdom in which it appears, i.e., the kingdom of matter, life, or mind. The quality of each of these is the part identical with a lower level, e.g., life has similarity with matter, and mind with life. The relation of the higher to the lower quality is that of mind and its natural basis. It is the soul of which is below. Thus, life in the soul of the body, which is matter, and mind is the soul of the body, which is life. Just as in the great space-time, time is the soul, and space is the body of space-time. Now, what place has God in such a system? Some critics have thought that God has introduced only as a ceremonious bow or as a point of honor, in respect for the terms of the Gifford Lecturers, but Professor Alexander denies this imputation and insists that his book on God is not mere comedy to complete the 3 preceding tragic books. He assures us that he is very serious. In discussing theodicy, Professor Alexander draws a distinction between deity and God. Deity is a quality, God is a being. A. Deity. As stated above, within the all-embracing stuff of space-time, the universe exhibits, in its emergence in time, successive levels of finite existence, each with its characteristic empirical quality. At one end of these undifferentiated space-time, at the other end progressive value. Among the 3 principal qualities, the highest known to us at present is mind or consciousness. Deity is the next higher empirical quality to the higher we know. This is true thought, all the levels of existence. Example: deity E, mind D, life C, matter B. Empirical configuration of spacetime A. A, B, C, and D represent the various levels of existence in the process of spacetime evolution. Now, by definition, deity is the next higher quality to the one yet evolved. When, therefore, the growing world is at A, deity is at B. When the growing world is at B, deity is at C. When the world reaches C, deity has moved ahead to D. Now, in our present state, we have reached D, and deity is at E. Deity, then, is always the quality just in front of us. Very tantalizing, it runs ahead of us, like a shadow pursued. Deity is, therefore, a variable quality, and as the world grows in time, deity changes with it. Professor Alexander does not wish to say that the matter in some way thinks or forecasts life. This it is incapable of doing. Only mind can do that. He merely wishes to say that if we could think ourselves back in the material existence, we should feel ourselves, though matter would be the highest that we know, still swept on that movement of time. There would still be that restless movement of time, which is not the mere turning of a squirrel in a cage, but the nisus towards a higher birth. But how then experience would take place in the material soul would require a power of description of greater capacity than Professor Alexander admits he has. It is to be noted that man alone does not know deity, nor does deity exist alone for him. It arises at each level of existence, whether it be mere indistinct configuration of space-time, or matter or life. What is the nature of deity? Deity is not merely mind or spirit like ourselves, any more than life is mere matter or mind or mere matter and life. We therefore cannot tell what deity is except that it is not pure mind. B. What is God? God is the being who possesses the quality of deity. God is the whole world as possessing the quality of deity. Just as time is the soul and space is the body of space-time, so is the whole world the body of God, and deity is his mind. But deity may be possessed in two ways, either ideally or actually, and according as it is possessed, an actual and an ideal God will result. What is the difference between the actual and the ideal God? It is a difference of existence. One is, the other becomes. God as actually possessing deity does not exist, but is an idea, is always becoming. But God as the whole universe, tending towards deity, does exist, as an actual existent. God is the infinite world with its nisus towards deity. God is therefore the universe striving towards deity. Now suppose it attains deity. Would we then have a God possessing infinite deity, or realized and accomplished God? No, says Professor Alexander, because if infinite deity did exist, God would cease to be infinite God, and he would break up into a series of finite gods or angels who would be a higher race of creatures than ourselves, with a God further on. Infinite deity implies an infinite world striving after deity. In this sense, God is infinite, but the attainment of the deity makes deity finite. Far back in the dim past, then, there were only mere configurations of space-time. The universe was straining towards the infinite mind. For that level of the existence, deity was matter. But when the nisus reached matter, the deity became life. When the nisus reached life, the deity became mind. Now we are striving towards the deity, and when we attain it, it will dissolve as an emotional state into a mere finite God or angel. Our search will have been in vain. God as an actual existent is always becoming deity, but never attains it. He is the ideal God in embryo. The ideal, when fulfilled, ceases to be God, and yet it gives shape and character to our conception of the actual God, and always tends to usurp its place in our fancy. The essence of God, if we may so speak, is a nisus, a striving towards a deity. He is in the process of evolution and not outside it, and he is the whole universe with a nisus towards deity. This perfection increases as the universe increases. His being increases in like manner. His perfection, if he will ever possess it, is to be placed at the term of evolutionary process rather than at the beginning. He is the unattainable omega of space-time.